For task number 1 today, you're going to be taking some notes about text structure. Yesterday we talked about the difference between informational and literary text. It's an interesting time to do that as we read historical fiction, especially historical fiction about the Middle Ages, because it's so much information packed into the literary text itself. So we're going to talk specifically about text structure today that goes along with informational text. You have a foldable. You're going to fold it and crease it along the middle here. Take notes on the front and then on the inside of the booklet as I give you some coinciding slides. You're going to talk about text structure, questions that we ask ourselves and try to answer as we're reading informational text, and signal words that authors use as transitions to help us recognize which of the 5 text structures they're writing about. After you've taken all the notes, you're going to go log into Achieve and read an article called Saving Robin Hood's Forest. We talked a little bit about Robin Hood last week. And you're going to add details to this as you read and before you answer the questions. So you're going to make sure you have a really good understanding of the article before you answer the questions by looking at how did the author compare and contrast in the article? How did the author show cause and effect and problem and solution, and so on. If you want to use different colors, you may, as always. So on the front cover, it asks you just to make a list of the 5 informational text structures. I don't believe these should be new to you. Compare and contrast, cause and effect, problem and solution, chronological order, and description. So if you need to, pause the screencast so you can write those down, and then continue on when you're ready. We do this to address these 3 standards, specifically with reading information. We need to learn how to analyze the structure that an author uses to organize text and see how those little pieces contribute to the big idea at the end. And then when we talk about text structure in literary text, it kind of overlaps a little bit when we talk about comparing fictional portrayals of a time and place, specifically the Middle Ages, with a historical account and how authors develop that. So the first text structure is compare and contrast, and it sounds just like its name. You're comparing, showing how things are similar, and how they contrast, how they're different. We've actually done a couple of different writing assignments that work with this compare-contrast idea. We've talked about them in terms of, writing, where'd my transitions go here? We've talked about them in terms of transitions as writers, but when we look at it from a reading perspective, when we see words like both or also or to or similarly, then we are looking for that the author is comparing and contrasting 2 different things. And that's something we want to make sure we understand before we move on. So pause the screencast, take a second to jot down those signal words. Oops. And then you'll see at the second part of your chart, the last column has a compare and contrast column. In the article, it's going to talk about how some of the things about Robin Hood are factual and some are fictional, and he's going to compare those things. I'm not saying you need to fill every bullet point, but make sure you take some time and reread that article to find that information. The next text structure is cause and effect. When we look at cause and effects, we're looking at what happened and why it happened, and then what happened, what were the effects as a result. So when we think of like pollution, we know what pollution is. We think about, when we talk about it, why it's happening and what problems it's caused, what are the effects of it. So some signal words that we use for cause and effect. An author might use the word because, as a result, so, since, however, if then, due to, and consequently. So again, pause the screencast, make sure you have the notes. And then when it's time for you to go read the article, I've given you one a cause. It's going to tell you that people cut down trees for ships, churches, and houses. I want you to explain to me, well, what's the effect of that? And then in the second example, I'm giving you the effect. I want you to give me a cause. The next text structure is called problem and solution. Just like its name, no big secret there. The author is giving you a problem that's happening in the world. And there might be one solution that they propose. There might be multiple solutions. And those are things that you want to take note of as you're reading. So these are some of the signal words you might see: issue, problem, solve, conflict, figure out, deduce, or solution, or any variation of that: deduction, deducing. So we know that prefixes and suffixes can be added to words without really changing the meaning of the word too much. So we look for similar words. Pause the screencast, make sure you have the notes. When it's time for you to go read, you're going to fill in the column explaining what's the main problem that the article was talking about, and what were the solutions. There might be more than one, but what were the solutions they talk about? Chronological order, we talk more about when we're reading literature, but we can think of that specifically in history when we talk about when events happened. What are the steps or events that led up to it? So some of those signal words are to begin, first of all, lots of prepositional phrases, sometimes some dependent clauses as well. So pause to take your notes. When it's time for you to read, we use a timeline to organize events in a visual way to help us organize information. And in the article, it's going to give you some dates that explain the life cycle of a tree as it grows in Sherwood Forest. And it's going to be broken down into 3 different chunks. So I want you to make sure that you understand those 3 pieces of time by organizing them in this little graphic, in this timeline. And then the last text structure is description. Just like its base, describe, it's talking about how something looks. Okay, what is being described and how does it look? Again, lots of prepositional phrases, directional words to help you as the reader visualize what that looks like. So pause to jot your notes down. And then I found this interesting. This is not from your article, but I found in 1787, which is around the time when Sherwood Forest would have been inhabited by Robin Hood, all this green here is what would have been considered the dense wood. Now, in the present day, and this is probably a little outdated as well from a couple years ago, look at how big of a change that forestry has changed. So just something interesting, and I want you to do a little bit of an explanation in your own words to describe that. You could use the cities that are highlighted on here and kind of compare where you see that change. So Robin Hood is one of the most well-known stories of the Middle Ages. When I come back, we'll do a couple of little fun videos, but Disney has done a version. This is one with Russell Crowe. This is more of a steampunk kind of version, so you know I like that one. And then the one with Kevin Costner, I remember that came out my freshman year of college and coming home from college for the first time to see that one. So lots of different versions of Robin Hood's. It's a story that you'll see lots of allusions to as well. So after you take your notes, go ahead and open Achieve. Take your time, read, annotate. When you are done, you're going to fill in the graphic organizers, answer the questions, and then I want you to turn that paper in. That is your grade for the day. When I come back, I will take a grade on that. Okay? If you have any questions, you can email me.